Spartans! What is your profession?
Hi everybody, John the Spartan Crafter here, and today we're going to work on making leather straps with buckles and all that good stuff. Let's introduce the tools. Here is your hole puncher. Now this little fella is really handy, and as you can see, there's a dial, and you can dial up whatever size you want. Now the next thing we need is our crimper. This little tool is a lifesaver, and you just put it on the piece you want and crimp it down. It's a lot more versatile and useful. These are tools, that's all you really need, except, well, maybe a scissor for cutting your material, and ruler for measuring. Very basic stuff. Alright, so the other things we're going to need is, of course, our buckles for our straps and our eyelets that we're going to crimp. Now both of these things I got on Etsy. I assume you could get this stuff on Amazon. I've never tried, so I don't know. And one other thing, we need these little crimps for the ends of the leather. What we're going to use all this stuff on is a kind of faux leather. Now you can use it on leather itself, but I prefer for whatever projects I'm using to use the faux leather, because personally I don't like using leather, and the people I'm selling my products to might not like that I use leather either, so that way I kind of cover my bases when I use the faux leather. Now here is the leatherette, or faux leather. Now, you know, from this side it looks pretty realistic. You know, it's a little shinier than the usual stuff I get. The usual stuff I get is a little more matted, but I thought I'd try this stuff. It's very thin, which is part of the reason why I get it. And on the other side, it just looks like some sort of material. Because it's only real on one side, there's a certain technique to making it look like real leather, or thickening it up so that it looks good when we're actually using it. And the first thing we do is figure out what size we want. So these buckles are the standard size I like for the gauntlets I make. Now, if you're curious about the gauntlets, I'll put a link in the description to my shop, and I'll also put a photo here of the gauntlets themselves. All right, let's get to this. Get one of the little buckles out. It's not a very large buckle, but it's just large enough so that you can, when you're tightening it on your gauntlet, you want to be able to manipulate it. So about 1 centimeter on the inside. So that's what we're shooting for as far as the thickness of the strip we're going to put in, because you really want it to just fit in snugly in this opening. And so we'll be making our strip that thickness. And to do that with this material, what you have to do is think, because what you're going to do is take this material, cut it, and let me show you on another piece. So that's the thickness I want. And, you know, fits in really nicely here. Not too small so that it moves around, and not too thick so that you can't even get it in without creasing it. So if you see in the front, that's what the appearance you want, but in the back you'll notice that it has been folded in on itself. Now what I did is when I cut the leatherette, I made it almost double, maybe a little more than double the size I want. And then I folded one flap down, not all the way to the edge, about a little more than halfway, and then the other flap down a little more than halfway. And to glue this in place, all I used was contact cement. Now, make sure though that the contact cement you use, and I use a couple of different ones, but make sure the contact cement you use works for this stuff. Works for fabric or leather or foam. That it's a multi-purpose contact cement. Now there are a couple that I use. I use this cheap stuff I get at the dollar store. It works just fine. Or I've also purchased the barges, which is great stuff too, and works very well. That they both work on multiple materials, so I don't have to worry about whether it's going to stick this or the foam, whatever. Now, why do I mention foam? Because foam, the reason I use the foam sometimes is, now this, if you notice, is a very thin looking strip. But if I wanted to bulk it up and make it look like a thick piece of leather, I'd use a little bit of foam. Foam sheet, cut it in the size that you wanted for this strip, for this part here. Cut the piece out, glue it into the center of your piece, and then fold the flaps and glue them on top. And what happens is that this piece goes from being a thin little piece of leather to a thick piece of leather that you can still punch the holes and do everything else you did with a thinner piece, but it gives it a little more body, and for some people maybe a little more realistic looking piece of leather. Now, I prefer the thin strips. They're much more manageable. Okay, so I cut my strip and I put a center line. Now, the measurement of the strip I calculated from the buckle itself. Now you don't measure the exterior of the buckle. That really won't help you. What you want to measure is the interior. Now, usually when you're buying these things, you'll get a description of all the dimensions, and that's what you need to pay attention to. Okay, for this demonstration, I'll be showing you how to do it yourself. So, comes out to about ½ an inch. It's a little hard to tell with the glare, but that's where it is. So ½ an inch. What you have to figure is that ½ an inch is going to be in here. All right, from this point to that point, because that's the surface you want to show on the opposite side. That ½ inch. So what you want is to be able to fold it up to that line and fold it up to that line from the two sides, which is why I put the center line. It's an easy guide for you to see how far you can fold it. Now, you need to put it maybe a little larger, but I think that ½ inch, see, because you just want to cover both ends a little bit. And you can make adjustments after you do the first fold. You might see that you're off a little bit. You just fold it a little more. Try not to undercut the piece. And once you've got it folded and glued in place, boom, it gets right in there. Now, for this demonstration, I'm also going to show you the foam padding technique I told you about. I'm only going to do a small area because I'll demonstrate both the padded area and without padding. So, okay, so first things first, we're going to glue this foam into place. Easy enough. Get my contact cement. Now, you don't need a thick coating. Just spread a nice thin coating. Now, here's the thing with contact cement. It's not supposed to go on wet. It is actually supposed to go on dry. So what you got to do is coat both sides. And it just needs a thin coating. It doesn't need a thick coating. And let it dry. And usually you have instructions on how long to let it dry, but usually I let it dry for about 5 minutes. Sometimes you have to wait a little longer, between 5 and 10 minutes, although you can, with the barges, you might have to wait up to 15 minutes. Now, when you're connecting the two parts, try to get it onto your center line as centered as possible. And here's another thing. Don't bring it right up to the edge. Leave a little flap. Leave this little piece because we're going to use it to cover up the imperfections of the piece. All right, you might have noticed I went ahead and glued the rest of it back there because we're going to need to glue it anyways. And now for this particular piece, because we want to fold it onto this piece, we have to do the same thing here where we're going to put a little contact cement here, and you could go right ahead and do the entire piece since you're going to fold both sides over. I suggest you not putting glue on both sides at the same time because it gets a little messy if you're trying to handle it. Now this side already has a little bit, just touching it up. Okay, so while that's drying, I'm going to handle the other end. Now the other end doesn't need that flap, but what we're going to do is, see, I'm going to bring it up to the center line and just go over it a little bit so I can cover up the entire center line. Push it down. Now both these halves are going to automatically contact and stick to each other, and that works best when both sides, well, when the contact cement dries, that's where its strength lies. It doesn't dry the glue in place. It needs the glue to be dry before you place it. You see? Okay, so now what we've done is I haven't brought it very far, but what we're going to do next is when we do this part, we're going to slide this and adjust it to where we want it, and just enough so that it doesn't go over the lip, but still giving us the right dimensions for this part. Now I was being a little careful here, but I could have slid it over a little more. We can't go down here yet until this dries, so we're going to wait a little bit, but we can start applying the glue on this side. Just a thin coating, and if you're having any trouble spreading the glue, just cut yourself a little bit of foam, or get a stir stick or something and just wipe it down. That's it. See how beautifully it spreads? Because you really don't need a thick glob of the stuff. You just need a nice thin coat everywhere. Make sure you get it everywhere, including the edge, because you want that edge to clamp down on the other piece and not be sticking out. That's why using a little bit of foam is very helpful, because you can control how you place it and how much you put, and spreading it. Also, it helps keep the time it takes to dry for you to apply it. Looks like we're good to go. Now, like I said, I'm going to bring it almost exactly to the edge, but I don't want to go over. I want to keep it from making a little edge there. But it's built up a nice, that double folding has built up a nice edge. I mean, a nice thickness. Go nice and slow, making sure you haven't left any bubbles. Now, here's a tricky part, because I should. Normally, I wouldn't do a spongy, like a thickened or padded one on the same strip. So normally you wouldn't have the padding there. You just keep going down and down. Now, what we can do to kind of straighten things out is just cut this off. This doesn't need to be attached since it's not going to be used on the same piece. And now we can. Now the thing with the padded one is you do have to make a larger measurement so that your piece will overlap a little more, because I use the measurements for unpadded. That's why we have this little gap here. But you see what I mean now? And we got a piece that looks like a thick piece of leather.